It's like the alarm system in their house is going on all the time. So there's a lot of fear in that. There's a lot of anxiety in that. There's a lot of stress in that. It's that accelerator of your car going all the time with no place to go.
Welcome to the Fearless Happiness Podcast, where we showcase phenomenal individuals who have overcome serious traumas, life obstacles, and challenges to find their own path to fearless happiness. Listen as Max Naist invites guests from all around the world to share their experiences and spread strength, hope, and faith. This is the Fearless Happiness Podcast, and this is Max Naist.
All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. It's Max from the Fearless Happiness Podcast, and I have a very amazing guest who's going to share her story with us today on the podcast today. But what I like to do, Dr. Perry, is have you introduce yourself to my audience, who you are and what it is you do, and then we're going to rock and roll.
Sounds great, Max. I'm happy to be here with you.
So introduce yourself to my audience, like exactly what you do, Dr. Perry, and then we're going to dive into your story.
Sounds great. So, for 23 years, I did acupuncture and nutritional medicine. I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and I did that in Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, and Belmont Shore. I trained for a year in one of the top 5 traditional Chinese medical hospitals in China, and that was 2 years after Tiananmen Square, so it was really a different change of scene there. Since taught at UCLA and had my offices in Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, and Belmont Shore, and then COVID hit. And fortunately, one of my patients had stumbled upon something that was really helping her with her trauma. She had a very, very traumatic past and some big challenges. And so I did a trade with that person and found that the subconscious mind is just wildly more powerful than the conscious mind. The conscious mind is only processing about 40 bits of information per second. The subconscious mind is processing 40 million bits of information per second. So there's no comparison. It's like if the tip of the iceberg wants to go in one direction and the base of the iceberg wants to go in the opposite direction, who's going to win that?
Right.
So it's crazy what gets fired and wired into our subconscious mind, usually between the ages of 2 and 10. But when you have a strong emotion, such as I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, relief is available to other people, but not available to me. Whatever that belief is, if it gets fired and wired to a strong emotion like fear, guilt, whatever it is, shame. We're big on that one in our society too.
Right.
When those beliefs get fired and wired together, it's Donald Hebb's law from 1948. They just keep firing and wiring together, and the brain will keep going back to that because it's familiar. The brain prefers a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven. So the trick in getting that to change is to go into the subconscious mind, find out what got fired and wired in there, why it got fired and wired in there. But in the language of the subconscious mind, it speaks in pictures and emotions. It doesn't speak in logical sentences. And then once it can see, I'm not an iPhone 4, I'm an iPhone 16.
Right.
Then it'll drop the old pattern when it can see that that's hurting it. And then it'll adopt that new one. So people typically have dirt roads to what they don't want, superhighways to what they don't want, and dirt roads to what they do want. So we want to flip that around so that you have a superhighway to what you do want and dirt roads to what you don't want. Your new default has to become, who you really are today. And I've just found that it's been wildly successful for people that, came to me with PTSD. They had done everything that the military had to offer, or, they had been attacked by a Rottweiler and had to go through all kinds of jaw surgeries and had developed choking disorders and, Lyme, mold, babesia, all these medical things that had cropped up because their stress and their emotions was all in that hypervigilance, in that stress, in that alarm system going off in their mind and their body all the time. So when you dial that back, you have a lot more at your disposal in terms of energy to heal.
Wow. I love this because it seems like the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, right, is bringing people on the podcast like yourself to talk about how powerful our brains are. Right. And you're right. Like you said, something like shame, especially in our society. Right. And what I've learned in my recovery, right, especially early on when I was doing the work to stay sober, was shame keeps us sick because it like you said, ignite something that when anything happens, we go, oh no, I'm not good enough, or because I did this, or, all that past stuff that keeps showing up instead of, right, the good stuff that needs to happen. And even today with 21 years sober, right? Like I find it difficult to let go of some things from my past, right? Even though it was 20, 25, 30 years ago. And I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. Right. But here's where the universe, he blessed me with bringing Dr. Perry on here. So we get to talk about that stuff. But before we get into that, Dr. Perry, like what I have found is helpers like us who like to help people heal and grow stronger and become successful and have a good life all have a backstory that led us to where we are. So can you share some of your story with us? Like what led you to get into, what you're doing now and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I guess as I was studying all this stuff, hypervigilance is an aspect of having been through trauma, because your brain again is telling you you're not okay. There's danger. You have to do one of the 4 Fs, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawning is the fourth one, which a lot of people aren't aware of, but that's the people pleaser. So if you are a habitual people pleaser, you're doing it because that alarm system's going off in your mind all the
Right.
time. Yeah. And your pattern was to people please. So I suddenly realized as I was studying this, my jaw sort of hit the floor and I went, oh my goodness, I have trauma. Just because I had that hypervigilance thing. It's funny because this affects people across the spectrum in terms of accomplishments. I mean, sometimes very, very accomplished people can have a lot of trauma because that's what makes them work so hard.
Right. Right.
They never get a sense that, in fact, I remember going to this really intensive, cool kind of self-discovery weekend, and we walked on 100 feet of freshly burning hot coals.
Oh, wow.
I had done a bunch of this. I did the Tony Robbins stuff. So I had done that several times and I knew how to do it properly. I'd also done it improperly. And if you look down and you are afraid of those coals, they will burn your feet. But if you walk it as if they're not even there and you can't even feel it, your feet are fine. It's the craziest thing. So I did this freshly raked thing of 100-foot coals. And at the end of it, we were back inside the auditorium, and the leader of the group said, if you're thinking about, your next accomplishment and you're not celebrating what you just did, that's your problem. And my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, oh my God, that's me. Because I didn't really allow myself to feel a lot of joy from my accomplishments. I was always on to the next thing.
Right.
Because again, if you don't feel good enough in yourself, you're always trying to fill it with something. So for addicts, that can be a drug, that can be shopping, that can be sex, that can be whatever. But
Okay.
it's that desire to fill something within yourself that's not feeling full. So if you fill that thing in an authentic way, in a real way, then you don't have to go out and reach for the substance. I've had people that had sugar addictions for their entire lifetimes and in one session didn't have it anymore. I've worked with a lot of people who have eating issues and substance abuse issues. I don't tend to work with really heavy addicts, but more of the lightweight stuff.
That's interesting because, right, like you say things and you're looking at me and I'm like, yeah, that's me. I used to be the biggest people pleaser. And now I recognize what you just said because I would do that. Like I would accomplish something, but I was always looking forward to the next thing, right? Because I always felt, well, you'll hear that from like a lot of the hardcore or any recovering person, right? We always felt like we weren't good enough because something in our past triggered something in our brains that, and I've openly shared this. I've shared this on one podcast where for me, it was working with my uncle at a swap meet, right? And I was helping a customer. They were buying something. So I took the calculator so I could give them the right change back. And as soon as I was done, he like shamed me for doing that. Like, how dare you use a calculator?
Mm.
Right. And then he told my mom that day, and she did the same thing. So, like, math and I are not friends. Like, it's created that block. But then I'd always hear too, which didn't help the situation. Oh, your dad was a really good math guy. Like he was an electrical engineer, so he had to study all kinds of different math. And it's what I'm leading to is like every time I talk to someone like you, Dr. Perry, is like things are coming back to me like that's what held me back. This is what's triggering this behavior, because even though I think I've worked on it, I'm catching myself going, oh, right. And part of me wants to go, darn it, Dr. Perry, you shouldn't have told me that, because now I got to look at it. Right. But at the same time, big part of me goes, thank God she's here so we can learn something. And hopefully my audience does too, because I think you're going to bring so much value to the audience. Because when they learn, like when I work with addicts and I tell them, you got to rewire your brain, right? Or you're going to still repeat the same things over and over, because your go-to is going to be, right, I'm not good enough, so I might as well get high. I'm not good enough, so I might as well get high, because then I don't have to feel anything and I don't have to work on anything. So like, let's dive deeper on that. Like, because you have trauma, I've had trauma, and everybody, someone told me trauma is
I
trauma.
think if you're born on planet Earth, you have some type of trauma.
I was just going to say that, but like, I know some are more serious than others, but trauma does affect like, and you don't even realize it, right?
I can give you a couple of examples of just, crazy changes that people are able to make quickly. One gal I worked with, she's a wonderful dental surgeon, and she never felt comfortable asking for money because she just didn't feel like she was worth it, even though her work is fabulous and, people love her. So we did a session, and it went back to a time that she was doing homework with her sister, and her sister's even more brilliant than she is. So her father said something that she interpreted as, shame and blame and I'm not good enough. So that stuck with her. That fired and wired all the way into adulthood and into her professional career. And all we did was go back and rewire it. And I called her up a couple of months later and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And she said, "Oh my God, I go home with more energy. I'm a better wife. I'm a better mother." And I said, "Dollar wise, what's it worth to you to be able to ask for what you're worth?" She says, "About an extra $10,000 a month."
Right.
So little changes can make big differences. I have another gal. I do a lot of the Dr. Joe Dispenza events. She met me at a Dr. Joe event, and she said, "You know what? I'm a gallerist now. I used to be a lawyer. I didn't have any problem asking for money when I was a lawyer, but as a gallerist, I just don't feel okay asking for money." She says, "Can you help me?" And I said, "Sure. Let's dive in and find out what that is." And during her couple of sessions working with me, she was able to go back and see, oh, this is why, because it's subconscious means below the level of your conscious. You're not aware of it most of the time. Sometimes people have an inkling, sometimes people, have clues, but a lot of times, sometimes just it comes out of left field. This came out completely of left field. We rewired it, and now she sells paintings for $30,000 and $40,000 and has a great time. So it's so amazing how stupid little things that happen in childhood, and it can be something really dumb, like you were doing something with your parent, like you were, you were ashamed about using the calculator. And all it takes is that strong emotion and I'm not worthy. And it doesn't matter what happens to us. It's our interpretation of ourselves, the world, and other people that's what gets us.
Right. And I think you're correct, because ever since then, I've had a hard time with money, and right. Because there was money involved. Like, I think there's this whole shame thing coming out for me, right? Or I'm not good enough to, like some of your clients, right? Where I don't feel like I have a hard time asking for what I'm worth, because part of my brain tells me that you can't do that because you had to use a calculator all those years ago. Right.
And it's really interesting how often somebody comes to me with a problem, and when we adjust it and rewire it, their sleep gets so much better. Because if you're in that hypervigilant state, your brain can never rest. It thinks that it has to be working all the time to fix the problem, and
Right.
it doesn't have the tools to fix the problem. So when you actually do go back and fix the problem, then all of a sudden they triple their REM sleep. They're getting a peaceful night's sleep that they've never had before. I had one gal that hadn't slept well for 7 years. She only slept 3 to 4 hours a night. She says, "I don't know how you did this." She went through regular sleep therapy. It didn't do anything. She says, "You didn't even mention sleep in the therapy." I didn't have to. All I had to do was remove the emotion that was preventing her from sleeping in the first place.
Wow, that's crazy. Because I was just thinking of Yeah, like how powerful the brain is. But we don't realize it at the time that it's going to affect us down the road. So I'm glad there's people like yourself that are out here helping people unblock those blockages, let's say, and traumas, and helping them live um, fulfilled lives, right? And so you're a doctor of acupuncture and nutrition, and what changed in you that you said, I'm going to help people with trauma? Like get
Well, because once I found out how powerful the subconscious mind was, I mean, as much as I love acupuncture and the results that I got with it were phenomenal, um, when you go to the subconscious mind and just remove the barriers, all kinds of healing can take place. I've had so many people with headaches and migraines and jaw grinding and, this crazy choking disorder that developed after having been attacked by a dog. And somebody else saw her husband catch on fire and, he's fine, but it ignited PTSD and mold and Lyme and mast cell inflammation. And she became allergic to everything but 5 foods. I just got a card from her. She's now about to have her first baby. So I'm super excited about that. But she was
nice.
living in terror because her world was just becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And her husband said, "Look, I don't know what else to do with you." She was doing acupuncture twice a week, neurofeedback, biofeedback, and nothing was getting to the root of the problem. And she didn't want to come and see me, but when she did, she experienced more peace than she had experienced in her entire lifetime. And after 3 sessions, she didn't need all those doctor's visits anymore. So it's just, I like to go with what works.
Right. And I'm glad you're here, because that's the way I like, as you know, like Western medicine, especially nowadays, is all about here's a pill. This will make you feel better. Uh,
I hate to say it. Bobby Kennedy came out and recently said, and I think it's totally true, that the healthy people are not a good business model. No,
right.
if they have a sick child and that child is chronically ill for its lifetime, it's a lot of money to the pharmaceutical world. So I mean, I hate to say it, but the evidence seems to be overwhelming that I mean, it's not like if you get in a car crash, of course you want to go see your orthopedist. You don't go running to your acupuncturist or your chiropractor.
Right. Right.
You need to have bone set. I have eye surgeon friends and they're amazing. Cataract surgery is amazing. And a lot of what they do with eye surgeries is amazing. But in general, so, a lot of people say, if this is possible, why doesn't my doctor know? And if you look at the work of Dr. David Perlmutter, he wrote Green Brain and Drop Acid, which is about dropping the uric acid levels in your body. He says it takes 18 years for good information to get into mainstream medicine. That's tragic. William Davis, who wrote Wheat Belly and Undoctored. I love the title of that book. But he was a cardiac doctor that got tired of giving everybody drugs and surgery when he found that lifestyle could solve most of the issues. So he says there's no ham and hamburger, there's no grape and grape nuts, and there's no health and healthcare.
I love it. Well, like you said, you work with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and like when I first read one of his books like he did a lot of stuff where he rewired his brain to fix his physical body. Because,
Yeah.
I
So
know.
I've done 9 of his live events, and I'm going to do a 10th in December. And I just love that community because this is a community that's really dialed into how powerful their mind is. He got hit by a car and
Mhm.
5 of his lumbar vertebra, and the only medical way to treat that was to put in Harrington rods, which would leave him with a lifetime of immobility and pain, which he didn't want. He was a black belt and an accomplished triathlete, and he knew the price, and an accomplished chiropractor, so he knew the price that he was going to pay if he did that. So he refused the surgery, and with the help of his buddies, and that had never been done before, a swimming pool, and not allowing himself a single negative thought, he now considers it the best thing that ever happened to him because it teaches you how to raise your heart and brain coherence. He is now teaching people how to raise their heart and brain coherence because it puts them in an optimal state for healing.
I just had a guest that talked about that, and that's what they do is help the mind and the heart be on the same level, like to beat as one, let's just say. And because there's so much to that, because I know when my heart and my head are not on the same page, it's right. And you talked about hypervigilance, and I'm glad you did, because like before, and even into my early recovery, right, I'll give you an example. Like I could sit here and talk to you, right? And I'll be talking to you, and then I'll be like looking past you, or looking behind me, and then I'd be looking to the other side, and people go, Max, like I'm right here. You know what I mean? But I'm always was looking out for something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because of what I had put myself through in my addiction, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just a habit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that anymore, thank God. But it was really bad where people would just hold me and go, look, I'm not here to hurt you. Just look, let's have a conversation. But I can't. I got to make sure that you're all right and I'm all right, and
Yeah.
this and
Yeah.
that. And so I love the work that you do because, I mean, yes, there's a place for Western medicine, right? Like you said, there's some people that need medication to help the brain chemistry, right? And or something happens, right? Like you go into a major surgery, you're not just going to come out and say, I don't need any meds because I'm Superman, right? Because I tried that. I only lasted 2 days, which is good. And then I went to ibuprofen, but like you said, I try to put myself in such a positive state is like, I don't need that medicine. It's just temporary to help me for the first couple days after my back surgery. And then I'm just going to slowly start just moving my body and getting the blood flowing because that's what's going to heal my body, right? From the books I've read
Well,
and
they
stuff.
are getting awfully good with, like people go in where for hip replacements now, they'll have you standing on that leg that day. They are getting really good with the rehab of those kind of issues. I mean, if you need a hip replacement, that's fabulous. If you need a knee replacement, that's fabulous. So yeah, you're right. There's definitely a place for it.
So when you made that decision to help people with their traumas, right?
Yeah.
And to right because well, who Dr. Gabor Mate is, right?
I
From
love him.
yes, right.
So a friend of mine, when I was very upset that when I would have parents come in who had drug addicted children, I felt kind of helpless in helping them because it's just such a painful, gut wrenching experience that they go through. So I said, if I want to understand addiction, what book should I read? And she recommended his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. So I'm definitely a fan of his work.
Right. And he thinks all addiction stems from some trauma, right?
Yeah, he especially recognizes the need for attunement when we're growing up, and if we don't get that it's really costly to our nervous system. Um, and he talks about Rat Park, which is the famous example of when rats have everything they want and need. They don't want drugs. They only want drugs when they're scared and alone, and we wonder why they want drugs. Well, same with people. If you're scared and alone as you're going to want drugs. And if you have all the balance and the care and the community, it's just less desirable. Well, like
Exactly.
the guys that came back from Vietnam, there was
Right.
that wonderfully um, clear example of these men coming back. And yes, they were all addicted when they were over there, but when they came back, a lot of them became addiction free rather quickly because they just didn't have the environment anymore that was causing them to suffer so much.
Right. And it brings me to a TED talk that I watched one time from this British journalist. It's what we thought about addiction is completely wrong, right? Where at the end, what he says, and I love it because it made me think about my journey and what I was doing. He goes, addiction, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It's connection, right?
Mm.
And and I know, like the more we're connected and have like our circle, our tribe, the more we thrive, right? But as you say, like when we're alone and we're going through all this stuff and we have nobody to turn to, I mean, it's not always drugs and alcohol, but there's other behaviors that people act out with, like you said, eating, sugar, sex, porn, whatever, you know what I mean? And so how do you help when they come to you and they say, Dr. Perry, this is what's going on with me? And you kind of gave us an example, like the dog attack, right? But like, how do you start with them to kind of ease their mind and go, this is going to be a process you're going to love, and we're going to get you to
Yeah.
where you want to go.
So I do a 30-minute consultation just to see if they're a good fit. I walk them through examples of what other people have experienced, how it works. I demystify the experience because I just worked with a two-time author. He had um, his name's Ray Catania. He wrote The Atheist in the Afterlife, and he grew up on the wrong side of the track in New Jersey. And most of the people that come from that background, they end up drug addicted or in prison. the mafia,
Right.
gunshots, all kinds of stuff. And so he has a near-death experience when he's 20, goes out and comes back with the ability to connect with people who have passed over. So he ended up working with a guy that actually works with the police department, and is a verifiable psychic. And he didn't believe any of this stuff until he started getting communications from somebody who'd passed over. And he's got a great sense of humor. And so I was on his podcast and he was on mine, um, and he had an issue that called me up. He said, I have this thing and I'd like to resolve it. And, so we did a session. And at the beginning of the session, he said, "You scare the shit out of me."
I love it.
And I thought, my goodness, you have the most amazing background ever. All these amazing things that have happened to you, the mafia and gunshots and cars exploding and dying and coming back. And you're afraid of me. So I was really appreciative that he shared his story of working with me on his podcast, because I really, in fact, that's the reason I started my podcast, is because I wanted to demystify the experience. So people can go on my YouTube channel, Dr. Tara Perry, or whatever it is, Dr. Tara Grace Perry, on YouTube. And there's a playlist there, and it's a whole bunch of people that have worked with me and what their experience was. And, you can see this is not a scary thing. It's you actually get more connected to your brain, not less connected to your brain. I can't make you think anything you don't want to think or believe anything you don't want to believe.
Right.
Throughout the process, I'm saying, did I get that right? Is that right for you? Because if it's not right for you, then it's not effective. It needs to be what your brain believes and what's real for you.
Right. Because, I think a lot of people, myself included at times, we're always afraid of the unknown, especially when it comes to the brain. Right. And someone telling us, "Hey, I can help you rewire your brain." And you're like, "I bet you can't, because I'm stubborn." Um, but the work I think that you do is amazing. And I'm so glad that you came on the podcast to share that with my audience.
I'm glad you said the thing about stubborn, because I actually own the domain name brainakido.com. And in Aikido, when something's pushing against you, you don't push back on it. You
Right.
take its energy and you push it back on itself.
Right. The Steven Seagal, what he is a master at, right? Where you're using their energy against them, but it's their own energy. Like, you're not really breaking a sweat because you're just using what they're coming at you with. And I think in life, and I think you'll agree, if we learned how to do that, life would become so much better instead of pushing back.
We got a long way to go when it comes to subconscious mind intelligence. We're getting there. I mean, some of us are getting there. But you gotta, mindfulness, meditation, kindness, gratitude, forgiveness of self is a big one, especially in the addict world. There's a lot of self beating up, and that just makes you want to be more of an addict.
Absolutely. And that was the first thing after my last relapse, when I went to my sponsor's office. That's funny that you said that. It's like, me or something here. Because the first thing he told me, he said, "Max, forgive yourself, because God already has."
Mm-hmm.
And something clicked that time he told me that. Like, I don't have to beat myself up anymore. Like I'm getting goosebumps with some of the things you're bringing up, because it's bringing back memories of where people have changed my life by certain things that they have said and done for me, and showed me the way, like yourself. And right. And I think you're right. This is why I'm so glad you're here, because I want guests like yourself to let people know that the brain is nothing to be afraid of. Right. I take that back. Maybe if you're using it for bad, or you're harming yourself or others, yes, then it's scary, and then that's bad. But
a lot of it's like looking for the monster underneath the bed. And once you have the courage to pull back the covers and actually look underneath the bed, you realize there's nothing there. I often say it's like the Wizard of Oz. Remember when they pulled the screen back, and it's just a little man pulling levers? Once you can see the little man pulling levers and why he's pulling those levers, you feel sorry for him, and you realize, oh, he's actually he's pulling levers to try to help me, but he's all, screwed up in his understanding of what's going on.
Right. And he's not so scary now anymore, because, he's just doing what he thinks is going to help us all. Right. And
the thing that's been vexing most people, it's actually your friend. It doesn't have the right skill set. It's the iPhone 4 functioning in an iPhone 16.
I got to upgrade then, Dr.
And
Perry.
we can all upgrade programming because your present day reality does have the information. It just needs to get its way back to that old programming.
Right. And you heard that, everybody, right? So that's why you search out people like Dr. Perry that can help you get back, to get back to that part of your brain and fix it or help you fix it. Right. And because one thing I do with my clients, as you know, in the addiction world, right, when we come in, we're so negative, right? And we're our own worst enemies. So the I don't try to give them a bunch of hard work to do where they're just like, I can't do this, and they give up and want to leave. I said, can you do this? And I lay it out and I said, you're going to do a gratitude journal every day for me while you're here. 3 things in the morning when you first wake up, and then 3 things at night when you go back, right before you go to sleep, right? Because neuroscience has proven that if you're putting something positive in your brain upon awakening, and that's the last thing you do, you're going to build new neural pathways in your brain, right? Which then I tell them, I go, I may not heal it, but you're in the process of being more open to the help that you're going to receive from a therapist or your counselor or at a meeting. And right. Because, I don't have to beat you up because I know you're doing that when we get off the call, you're like going back to your room, like, oh, but that's sometimes as simple as I keep it is just to get them thinking, I can change this. Right. Like, and then they ask me, do you do this? And I say, I've been doing it for 21 years. I think it's one of the biggest things that's helped keep me sober besides the other work I've done. Right. It's because I'm not sitting in my house going, Max, you suck. You're no good. Right. I don't do that anymore. Right. I mean, I beat myself up when I don't hit my own expectations on something I want to do, but I think that's normal. Right. But it's a lesson I get to learn and go, okay, don't have to be so harsh on yourself. Just try better next time. What'd you learn? Right. And I always try to tell them everything in life is a lesson you can learn that's going to help you grow. Right. And I'm so happy that you're here because I want my audience to understand that you're out there. Like Dr. Perry can help you if you really want to change the way your brain functions and the way you treat yourself and others. Reach out to her because she's going to help you. Right. And I'm glad I get to be the vehicle to connect you and anybody in my audience that wants to do this, like even myself, because I know I'm a work in progress. And for my guests like yourself, I'm always learning, okay, it's not hopeless, right? She's been doing this for years and she's helped so many people. Or I don't know.
I don't think it's hopeless at all. I just
No.
if what you're doing isn't working, try something else. I mean, there's meditation, there's breath work. I interviewed a guy, he's a veteran. He was a quadriplegic once and a paraplegic once. He healed himself both times with breath work.
Holy moly. See, I love that you said that. I know a guy who was medically retired as a firefighter because of his PTSD, and he had asthma. He learned breath work, like dove headfirst into it, and now has cured his asthma.
Awesome.
You're right. Like he goes, I don't need an inhaler anymore. I've cured it. And, for me, like this is my medicine, right? These awesome conversations I get to have with yourself, Dr. Perry, and learn from you and ask you all these questions. But I'm going to get into some of the questions that I love asking. And like, first one, fearless, right? What does fearless mean to you now? And
Great question.
How does that show up in your life on a daily basis?
That's a great question. Makes me think of Tony Robbins. The fear less, if you break it down, it doesn't mean you don't have any fear at all. You just fear less.
Love that.
So when I'm working with people, and when I'm talking to them, usually people are in some form of that sympathetic nervous system being very high. So it's like the alarm system in their house is going on all the time. So there's a lot of fear in that. There's a lot of anxiety in that. There's a lot of stress in that. It's that accelerator of your car going all the time with no place to go.
Right.
So when you dial that back, fear is healthy and good, but it should be turned off most of the time, because there is no real danger most of the time. It's like a deer in the woods. If it sees, a coyote, it'll take all of its resources and be able to run. Its eyes will dilate. Its blood is going to go out to its legs, so it can run really fast. It's going to be aware of its surroundings. It's going to find safety. But as soon as it finds safety, it switches back. Its immune system will turn back on. Its hormonal system will turn back on. Its digestive system will turn back on because they don't get stuck in fight or flight like humans do. Humans, because we've got this crazy imagination, we're stuck in, danger, danger, danger. I'm not safe. I'm never safe. Even if the injury was back when you were 4 years old, 6 years old, or, your uncle or your dad chewing you out for, using the calculator, your brain didn't forget that.
Not for a long time.
That's the trick. Fearless means not being stuck in fear. It means being less fearful and, still having a functioning fear system because that served us, but dialed back so that it's appropriate.
Right. And that, yeah, we don't have to live in that heightened sense of like, I have to run or fight at any given moment, and therefore we get to enjoy life, right? When you, like you said, I like how you said, dial it back so that it's a healthy fear less, right?
Because otherwise you're never living in the present moment. You're always stuck in the future or the past.
Right. And yeah. And see, like you talk about, addicts are good at that, especially early on. We're either so stuck in the past and all the things we've done, or as they call it, we're future tripping on things that haven't even happened yet. And then we get all anxious and anxiety ridden, and right, we can't function because we don't know what's going to happen, but yet we're stuck like it's already happening. But that's why, like you said, I loved some of the things you mentioned, like prayer, meditation, mindfulness, the stuff that just keeps you present and aware of the present moment. Because like you and I right now, everything's perfect. Like we're having a good conversation. Everything's fine. Nothing's going to, we're having an awesome conversation. And that's where our attention should be. Not like, hold on, Dr. Perry, I got to think about something that happened 10 years ago, and then I'll get back to you. Right. You'd be like, I'm out of here, Max, or wait, Dr. Perry, something's going to happen in about 5 minutes, and 5 minutes goes by and I'm still like wondering, but I do know people like that. Like, and I love trying to help them get out of that. But sometimes this is where I need a Dr. Perry to go, Dr. Perry, I have someone for you. They need your help desperately. So that helps me move on to the next question, right? Because it sounds like the work you do is wonderful work that helps people get happy again and live life to the fullest, right? So that leads me to happiness, right? As you say, I put the Y in it. What does happiness mean to you, and how does that show up in your life on a daily basis?
I think happiness is actually our natural state, believe it or not. When babies are typically happy, I have just seen over and over and over again, when you remove those old filters that are stuck in stress, anxiety, fear, people are able to experience bliss and happiness for the first time in their life. It's different for different people. Sometimes people are able to experience calm for the first time in their life. In fact, I had one gal who had a lifetime of anxiety, and she called me up the next day. She said, I feel stoned. Is that normal? And I said, yeah, that's what it feels like to not have anxiety. Enjoy it.
I love it. Right. Yeah, that's awesome. That's like, I remember the first time I had a using dream. I called my sponsor. I said, I think I relapsed. And he goes, what? I go, yeah, I had this dream. And he goes, Max, just enjoy it. It's a freebie, right? Yeah. You didn't do it. You did. Are you high now? No. And he goes, well, then enjoy it. It's a freebie.
The other part of happiness that I think is so important is gratitude, forgiveness, and gratitude is just huge, because if you aren't aware of all the blessings in your life, then you really are cutting yourself off from happiness. You get more of what you focus on, 100%. So if you're focused on shame, blame, I'm not good enough, so-and-so didn't treat me right, I need revenge, blah, 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 you'll get more of those feelings. And if you focus on, gratitude's a miracle. Forgiveness is a miracle.
I love that, because that's exactly how I try to live every day, in an attitude of gratitude, and to remain grateful for the things I have, so that I don't focus on the things I don't have. Does that make sense?
One time I was complaining, and my meditation teacher said to me, Tara, do you ever wake up just grateful for your breath?
Right. And you're
He
like,
would say he would say thanks to me, and he went to prison, by the way, and he found enlightenment in prison, and then he went into prisons after he got out, and he was one of 4 people in the entire state of New York to be receive a full clemency, because he transformed so deeply with this transformation that he made. He went on a macrobiotic diet, and he was doing his yoga at 4 in the morning and his meditation, and literally transformed the prison, and went back in for free and taught prisoners how to meditate, and ended up winning the Pass Award, which is a prestigious award for helping prevent recidivism.
see, I love hearing about stuff like that, right? Where they go through some of the worst, individuals go through some of the worst times in their life. And they, of course they go serve their sentence, and right in one of the harshest places on earth, they find enlightenment. And then they want to go back and help other inmates, right? Learn how to be okay with where you're at, and that you can change. Even in prison, you can change. For instance, I had when I was first sober, I had a guy that I had speak at a meeting, right? Did 17 years in California and got sober on a level. I think level 4 is like the toughest of the toughest, right? Where all they send the worst of the worst. And him and his buddy looked at each other one day and they go, I know we're going to be in here for a while, so we might as well get sober, but because I'm tired of living this lifestyle. So him and his buddy started going to their first AA meetings in prison. They get sober. He was 17 years sober at the time. And so in part of his story, he talks about like how in prison, this little old lady, like offered him coffee, and, and it was one of those moments, right? That they said, yes, we got to make this change. So long story short, he starts his own like remodeling business or construction, right? And he's going to the courts in Santa Ana, California, to do a job for a judge inside and redo his not the courthouse, not the where they sit, but like the judge's chambers. Right. So they get out of the elevator and they look up and they see the judge that they're working on. And it was the judge that sent them to 25 years to life.
Ooh.
Yeah. And he said him and his buddy just smiled and just looked at each other like God works in mysterious ways. Right. And they ended up, doing a great job. But I think he's still sober. I'm 21 years. So who knows, unless something happened, he's still sober. But I love those kind of stories, right? Because gratitude, if you can lay that as your foundation for the day, where you're just right, and everything doesn't have to be perfect. Like sometimes I'm grateful that things aren't perfect because I get to learn something today. Or, like when I was sick and I let I was sick, I'm like, oh, I was so bummed out, but I'm like, I'm grateful today that I feel good and that me and Dr. Perry finally get to have this conversation and talk about her life and her practice and all that stuff. So this has been so amazing, Dr. Perry. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure to be here with you, Mac. I love your passion for helping people.
Thank you. But if someone wants to get a hold of you, Dr. Perry, they want to work with you and do the work with you, how do they get a hold of you?
They can go to my website, consulttara.com. You can also go to nashvillehealer.com. It goes to the same place. And there's a Let's Talk button. They can fill out a couple of clarity questions so they can find out what it is they actually want to shift and change, what they've done so far to try to shift and change it, and then set up a 30-minute complimentary consult call with me. I call it a GPS call because you're one place, you want to go to someplace else, and so your GPS takes you from one to the other.
I love it. That's so awesome. Wow. Like I said, it's been a great time, but you're not quite off the hook just yet. I get to ask you my one final question, and it's always my favorite of my guests to ask you this. So it goes like this. What is the one piece of advice, Dr. Perry, that you could give my audience to help them grow as human beings and become better people?
Oh my God, I can give you many. On my website, there's a whole reading list. I
I
have
love it.
I have clients that say that they think I've read every book on the planet. I'm a very voracious, curious. I'm so grateful. I think we stand on the shoulder of giants because for, $13 or whatever it costs to get an Audible download, you can sit and listen to a book in your car. You can take it to the gym with you. You can go on Amazon and order it. But I love Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is. I think she is a modern day enlightened person. She was in a halfway house, very down on herself, sleeping on the floor. She didn't feel like she was worthy to sleep in a bed. A cockroach crawled up her leg, and between sleeping and waking, she had a completely clear revelation that all of her suffering was in her mind.
You know, I probably agree with that 100% because, like you said, and you've kind of brought it out in this podcast, is that a lot of our stuff is in our head. And if we could
Well, I've
just,
got some also great resources on my podcast. I interviewed Jill Bolte Taylor. She's the neuroanatomist that had a stroke of half of her brain. And guess how you feel when you don't have your left brain?
wow, how do you feel?
You feel blissed out. You don't know where your body stops and the rest of the world starts. There's only one problem.
And what's that?
Pretty hard functioning in 3D. So
Love
it's
it.
this left brain. It's the part of our brain that's categorizing things, judging things, and that's the part in an effort to protect us that comes up with all these, rules for things. But again, they're outdated rules. They got in place, when you were 2, 4, 6, 8, whatever, when you were just a sponge and absorbing that information. So the reason a lot of physical issues go away when they do this work is that when you disconnect from all those programs, it's like dumping off a 150-pound backpack you've been carrying around. You have all this energy that's now available for feeling good, for healing. I had this crazy situation where a fellow in the Dr. Joe community was all excited when he found out I was an acupuncturist. And I said, you've done acupuncture, you've done chiropractic. He had broken his spine 40 years earlier in a motorcycle accident and had recurring back pain. I said, why don't we just go to Command Central and find out what the problem is and fix it? Because if you break your femur, which is the thickest bone in your body, that should be healed better than ever in 8 weeks if nothing's in the way of the healing. He said, great, sign me up. And in 2 sessions, he didn't have pain anymore. And I said, are you surprised, that this happened so quickly? And he says, no, I know how powerful my subconscious mind is.
You just
He's
needed
on,
your help.
he's on my podcast twice, once for the back healing. It says used mind to heal his spine. Previous to that, about a month earlier, we did an interview, spectacular story. He used the Dr. Joe techniques to pull his son out of a 3-week coma.
Wow.
And there had been 3 brain scans. The kid was not supposed to wake up.
Well, everybody, you heard it, right? I'm going to definitely in the show notes and stuff, put all this stuff so you can follow Dr. Perry and her wonderfulness. And because she brought it today. So I hope that you guys all got as much value out of this podcast that I did today. And I'd love to have you come back another day and we could probably talk some more. But so you heard it, everybody. If Dr. Perry made you laugh, if she made you smile, if she taught you something, if you learned something, and my famous, if she made you go, I like that. Please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review so more people can find the podcast. And again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. It's Mac from the Fearless Happiness Podcast. Until next time.
Are you tired of being weighed down by life's traumas and struggles? Join the Fearless Happiness lifestyle and let us guide you toward a brighter future. Explore our past podcast episodes and get a copy of the Fearless Happiness book to ignite your inner strength. If you or someone you love is battling addiction or facing challenges related to unresolved trauma, know that we are here for you. Visit maxnijst.org, maxnijst.org, and take the first steps toward finding your fearless happiness. Thank you for listening. This has been a production of Fearless Happiness.